Hello record collectors and music lovers. Welcome to Vinyl Stockholm. My name is Jonas and I'm a record collector from Stockholm, of course, in Sweden. And today I'm going to talk about progressive folk from the British Isles, from the UK and from Ireland. And these records were released in the late 60s, early 70s, during the same time as progressive rock were emerging. And they share some similarities between progressive rock and progressive folk. And that is like the long, complex song structures, the playing around with different time signatures, or incorporating different instrumentations or mixing up genres. But progressive folk were never as pretentious as progressive rock. And it was just a short period of time with the progressive folk, and it never took off. It was just like in 69, 70, 71, and after that it kind of disappeared and had its revival in the 90s or the 2000s. And the British underground folk, they have their foundations in what I think is like four really important artists. And I'm not gonna talk about them or show records by them in this video, but I just want to mention them because from those artists, all these other underground folk came. And first of all, we have an incredible string band that I talked about in my UK acid folk video. They were starting to create unusual songs with different instrumentations, mixing up psychedelia and surreal lyrics. Another band that was really important is, of course, Fairport Convention, who took these old English traditional songs and played them in a rock band with electric guitars and electric bass and drums and everything. And of course we have Donovan, who started out as a folky singer-songwriter, but he mixed up the psychedelic pop with folk to create something really new. And the last one I have to mention is Pentangle. They were like top-notch musicians that could play like a jazz band, but they played folk, mixing up blues and jazz and folk. They had, of course, Bert Jansch and John Renburn that were really important guitar players to this whole folk scene. So if you have Fairport, you have Incredible String Band, Donovan and Pentangle, you have like the foundation for everything that became underground folk later on. But I'm not going to show these big names in this video. I'm going to focus on more obscure and rare albums, but still with absolutely amazing music on them. Most of these records back in the days didn't sell much at all, so over time they have become rarities and hard to find, and many of them are quite expensive. But don't be afraid. They have been reissued, so you can easily access them these days. So, enough rambling. Let's just dive into this progressive underground folk episode. The first album I'm gonna show is an album that many people would describe as the ultimate progressive folk album from England. And it is Comus with First Utterance. An album that was released in 1971. What you see here is a kind of a grotesque monster. And if you look at the gatefold cover, you can see the whole monster here, screaming of angst and terror. But if you look at the inside, it's a more beautiful painting. And this monster is actually called Comus. So the band is named after this monster called Comus. Comus, they got together in late 60s, I would guess, and they came in contact with David Bowie, who were a big fan of the band, and they started to perform at his arts lab in London. And I think even Comus played at Bowie's free festival, Memories from a Free Festival. Anyway, they got their name Comus from an old play by John Milton, the poet, from 1632, where he described this creature as a evil spirit that roamed the woodlands and the forests, and he used to lure young women into his home, and then do horrible things to them. So lyrically, this album is filled with like murder, rape, and blood, and it's like a British horror film from the 70s, bleak and eerie and, creepy stuff. So this is like a horror folk almost, but it's also very progressive. There are long tracks, there are unusual song structures and really innovative stuff, and stuff that you have never heard on any other album at all. It's kind of unique. And this is the UK original that came out on Dawn Records, on these orange Dawn labels. It also came with an insert with some lyrics here and images of the band. And the main guy behind this band is called Roger Wooton, and he was really influenced by this whole horror thing, and all his lyrics are about murder and rape and horrible things like that. And he shared the vocals with a female vocalist called Bobby Watson, and she was only 16 years old when they did this album. I wonder if she was aware of all the horrible things they were singing about. I'm not sure. This band, they had like electric bass, acoustic guitars, violins, there are some flute, and then it's the vocals. And the vocals is really evil. It sounds like wizards and witches coming together for a Sabbath or something. And this like horror sound from this album makes it very attractive to metal fans. So this album is very sought after by metalheads. And this band logo here looks almost like it could have been a black metal band or something. So this whole album just screams metal and it screams horror. This is not an easy listening. It's kind of demanding, and I like it in small portions. I wouldn't like play the whole album at a time, but it's really well played. It's really interesting songs, and it's a very unique sound.
Bright the sunlight, summer day, Comus wakes, he starts to play. Virgin fair smiles so sweet, Comus' heart begins to beat. Rise up, Comus, sing your song, bewitch the maiden, the day is long. Cast your spell, sweet music, cry of virtuous share.
The next one is also a truly progressive folk album, but it has more of rock elements that Comus had. And it's a band called Fuchsia, with their self-titled album that was released in 1971 on the Pegasus label. And here we have the band in the background here. This was released in this kind of beautiful, I don't know if you can see, beautiful textured cover, heavily textured cover. And this illustration of this girl, Lady Fuchsia, was done by the same artist that did Caravan's Land of Grey and Pink. This album got released in the UK on this Pegasus label, beautiful label. The main guy behind this LP is called Tony Durant, and he was, in the late 60s, he was part of this whole psychedelic scene. He played in a band called Louise, that they never released anything, but he was a part of this whole, I think, London psychedelic scene, playing the UFO Club and playing with Pink Floyd and those types of bands. But this is a few years later when he went to college. He got really interested in classical music, and he thought that he wanted to combine that with the rock music that he came from. So he started to write songs, and he had a small tape recorder, so he started to come up with arrangements for the classical parts, for the string parts. But he couldn't write scores, so he used to like sing the violin line into a tape recorder and listen to it, see if it worked. Then he would add like a cello or a second violin and see if that works. So he like recorded many of these arrangements just with his vocals and tried them on. A little later on, he met up with 3 girls that were playing classical music at the college, and he asked if they wanted to join the band. So he formed this band with drum, bass, and he was playing guitar and singing, together with these 3 girls who played violin and cello, and they were also singing some background vocals and background choirs. So they had a kind of unique setting with 3 girls and 3 guys, a rock band setting and a classical setting. And they started to play the songs that he had written with the arrangement that he has done, and it sounded fantastic.
Above the moorland grey sky rage, scattered in confusion, dispelled all thought of blame or praise, left me with its blessing. Cool she breathes, light she flies, sunshine and in shadow. And the day will come again, my friend, that gave me a rainbow.
It's very progressive. It's more like a rock album. They have this like drum, guitar, bass body together with this kind of sometimes eerie, angelic vocals from the girls, with this really innovative string arrangements. And the song structures are not just your usual verse, chorus, verse type songs. They are longer songs. They go into different parts, and the violins and the rock music, they work really well together. And the album was produced by David Hitchcock, a famous producer who had produced Caravan and Genesis and a lot of other progressive bands. And he produced this album, so it sounds really good. And it's a kind of unique album with top-notch progressive folk rock, in my opinion. They released this really cool album, came out in 1971, and that was the only thing that they released back in the days.
3 ships with black sails, their wake cast blood red by the sun. Turned to the west, everyone disappeared, confining the waters in lines drawn and quartered, ruled by the crown.
The next LP is another album that was produced by David Hitchcock, same guy that produced Fuchsia, that I just showed. And this time we're gonna go to Dublin, to Ireland, and this is also one of the finest progressive folk rock albums ever recorded and released. And it's the very rare album Mellow that was released on Deram in 1972 in this black and white cover. It's a gatefold cover. And on the inside here, you have the lyrics, and you have this like band biography with some really heavy hippy-dippy texts about the members. This album is seriously rare and seriously hard to find. Actually one of the rarest LPs that I have in my collection. It's an absolutely fantastic progressive folk rock album that has so many layers of interesting music on it. Mellow Candle were started by 2 really young girls called Alison and Clodagh. And they started in school by singing harmonies and doing more harmony pop. And they were really good at it, so they actually could release a single in 1968. But they were only 15 years old when they released that single, and it didn't sell much. So they went back to Dublin, reformed Mellow Candle together with a guitar player and a drummer and a bass player. And Clodagh, she was also playing the piano. And Alison and Clodagh were sharing the vocals. And they started to rehearse and write songs and rehearse, and they became really, really tight, good band. And eventually they got picked up by Deram, that gave them a contract to release an album. So they went over to London. They got David Hitchcock as a producer, and they stayed a couple of weeks in London just to rehearse and practice and to record this album. So the record label paid them some money in advance to record the album, but when it was finally done, they didn't spend any money on promoting it, and this album just sold nothing. And this album is a mix of folk rock, if you think of like Fairport Convention, but way more complex song structures. And they also had Clodagh, who was playing piano. So many songs are piano-led. Some songs are really, really progressive as well, with weird time signatures. So this is a really complex album, but even though the music is just natural, it flows like water, and it feels like they are playing without any ease at all. It feels so natural, even though it's really complex if you start to listen to the music.
Moon-filled and thunderful, star-staggered eyes. She broke away to be one with the skies. She feeds his love to the nightmare she rides. Suffers the hunger to inherit the prize, queen of the skies. Thunder-stricken tempest strikes fire in the sky. Beacons of flame.
So this album could like attract the folk rock fans, it could attract the psych fans, it could attract the progressive rock fans, but it could also attract like pop fans who like Kate Bush or music like that, with their like double-tracked vocals and harmony vocals and the piano and everything. So it has many layers of great, great music on it. And by the time this came out in 1972, they were just 19 years old, and they had written all this amazing music, and their singing is like tight as Bon Scott's pants. I mean, they had been growing up together singing, so they are super tight on the vocals, and the vocals arrangements are really, really beautiful.
But if I weep to solve the silent misery, they save my tears to sell for silver.
Anyway, this came out on these brown Deram labels, and this is the first UK press that is really hard to find. Since it's so rare, I have to tell you how I got it. It was, as with most of these rare albums, of course, a trade. A really good friend of mine here in Sweden, who has been running the Mellow label, his name is Stefan Dimle. He has been a long-time collector, and he actually found this when it was some kind of clearance sale from a record label, or from I'm not really sure, but it was clearance sale with unplayed records. And he went in there, and he was second in line on a crate. The guy in front of him found this and pulled it up, looked at it for a couple of seconds, and then put it down. So his heart was, of course, speeding, but he eventually got to flip that crate and just took this record for, I think he paid €2 for it. But when I suggested that we would do a trade, it was a totally different amount, of course. This is a big rarity. So I piled up a bunch of rare records and I said, I have this, do you want to do a trade? And we agreed on a trade, and now I have this. And all the records that I traded away were records that I could find again, but this record was once in a lifetime opportunity, so I just had to do this trade. And what a record, and what a great, I'm saying grail, it's almost like a grail in the collection. The next album is also a classic in this progressive psychedelic folk from England, and it's a band called Spirogyra. This is their debut album called St. Radigunds that came out in 1971. It came in this like inner sleeve with lyrics, and it was released on the B&C Records, this label. This band was formed by a guy called Martin Cockerham. He was originally from Bolton, but he moved to Canterbury to study. And in Canterbury, he formed this band together with a bass player, the violin player, and a female vocalist called Barbara Gaskin. You can see her down here. You see all the band members here. And actually, this guy, Steve Borrell, he actually commented on one of my videos for when I did a video about the Canterbury scene. Because they came from Canterbury, so they were part of the Canterbury scene, even though they weren't at all sounding like Soft Machine or Caravan or the traditional Canterbury bands. They played more of a folk, progressive folk, psychedelic folk. In the summer of 1970, they went into the studio to record this debut album. It was produced by Sandy Roberton, who produced many great folk rock albums from this time. It's often electric bass, violin, acoustic guitars, together with Martin and Barbara's vocals. Lyrically here, they are very political. They were very anti-materialistic and anti-capitalistic, and wrote songs about that. And they also got Robert Kirby to do the arrangements for the album. Robert Kirby is of course famous for being Nick Drake's arranger, that Nick Drake brought in to do the string arrangements for his songs. And they got help from both Dave Mattacks on drums on a few tracks, and by Tony Cox, who played synthesizer on one song. And they wrote some fantastic songs here. I love the opening track, The Future Won't Be Long, Captain's Log is a great song, and of course Love is a Funny Thing with Barbara's voice is a classic. And they released 3 albums before they quit, and this is the first one of them.
Fresh unfaded green makes my heart to dream, and the April rain washes me clean again of the sorrows that held me down. Oh, love is a very funny thing. It lingers on.
The last album I'm gonna show is another stone cold classic in this underground folk scene. And this band, they were at the same time as progressive rock were starting to emerge. They were starting to mix up folk with jazz to create this album. And this is the band Synanthesia. If you can pronounce it, you'll buy it. I think you should say Synanthesia. And this is just a lovely album cover where the 3 of them are standing behind this really, really old kind of tree or whatever that is. Synanthesia written in orange there. Beautiful one. A black and white cover, the 3 members there. This album was also produced by Sandy Roberton in 1969. They were influenced by Incredible String Band and Donovan, and they were also influenced by jazz a lot. So they actually took their name Synanthesia from a Cannonball Adderley song called Synanthesia. So it's definitely a mix of folk and jazz. They used a vibraphone, they used saxophone and flutes, together with bongos and acoustic guitars, to create this sometimes late night jazz club vibes, but in a more psychedelic folk way. The album was mainly recorded live in the studio, so this is basically how they sounded when they played. Very few overdubs were done. Beautifully performed, and it has a kind of unique vibe. So this is definitely a progressive folk album, but it's not very rocky. It's more of a jazz folk trip, and it's a really good one. And just a few months after they had released this album, the band quit and they moved on to other things and didn't release anything else.
Come into my parlor, said the spider to the fly. We can spend an hour watching the day go by. Bring your own joints of weed, we shall have all we need, sitting sheltered from the...
So there you have it, some of my favorite progressive folk albums from the late 60s, early 70s. All these records are very rare and sought after these days, but when you have great music like this, and they didn't sell much at the time, the price is of course going to go up for these originals. But I have been collecting these records for a long time, and I have been doing all the work with the trading and selling and trading to get these records. So I have a quite nice collection of folk, and that is why I'm doing this series, to show you some of my favorite albums from psych folk and progressive folk and stuff like that. And I'm gonna do more videos. I'm planning on doing one with female singer-songwriters, or electric folk rock, or more of this good stuff. So thanks for tuning in, and be sure to buy records and all that stuff, and take care out there. Peace.